Hello, everyone. I'm Sergio Santamaria, and I'm so excited to welcome you to the first ever People Uncommon Pods podcast episode. This will just be a quick introduction to what a pod and what this podcast will be. And future episodes will be actual Uncommon Pods themselves. I am so excited about Uncommon Pods because I don't think anything like them exists in today's world. We can do just about anything to find people that have similar interests to us. They're at the same classes, they're at the same activities, they're doing the same things that we're doing. But where do we go to find people that are very, very different from us? And when you end up in conversations of very different people, you learn. And I, in my situations, when I have done so, have learned. And that to me fascinates me, it excites me. And that's why we're excited to share Uncommon Pods with the world. Now, what is the point of an Uncommon Pod if we are all about friendships and community? The People app will be about meeting new connections, turning those into friends if you would like to, and keeping those friends once you have them, which leads to a happier and longer and healthier life. Now, pods are about that first component of meeting new connections because we can put other ways to do so on our app, and we will, but we also want to offer a version or a way to do that ourselves. And that's what pods are. Pods can be of people that are very similar to each other. We'll call those common pods. And they can be in person or virtual. The uncommon pods, at least at first, that we'll be sharing on this podcast, will be virtual, and anyone can sign up. The link to sign up for a pod profile will be in the show notes for this episode. They won't all be recorded. In fact, most will be private and left to the members that join them. However, ones that I join and that the group consents to allow recording of, we will record and release some of them as episodes on this podcast because these conversations are fascinating, and people that get brought together from completely different backgrounds that probably would never end up in a conversation otherwise, if not for people, always have fascinating things to share. I've learned from those experiences, and we think that you will learn from them too. For the rest of the show, I'm going to share my screen if you're watching this as a video. If not, feel free to pause here, listen later when you're about to join your first pod, or go ahead and listen now. But we want to have our instructions and our guidelines for what pods will be documented here on this episode before releasing one itself, so that you know actually what is sort of being laid behind the scenes in terms of a foundation and a set of benchmarks for each member to adhere to when they are part of a pod. I would absolutely love to see you on a pod someday. We think that these are incredible opportunities to ask people about their areas of expertise, learn from others. They may not necessarily become the best of friends, and that's totally fine, but come curious, leave connected, have an intellectual and enticing conversation, and I would love to see you on them one day. So enjoy the rest of this episode if you're going to listen through our guidelines. If not, keep an eye out for our first episode dropping soon and further episodes after that. And thank you so much for being part of the People community. It means the world. So these instructions are all subject to change, first of all, but they will be delivered via email to each pod member before the actual pod, in addition with brief introductions to the members that will be joining the pod with you. I'll read through them just so we have them documented in our first ever podcast episode, and also for you to understand what you are getting yourself into and know what the guidelines and run of show and what to expect from these pods will be. The first instruction will be for virtual pods only, having your camera etiquette and screen names set. So join the meeting with your camera on and keep it on for the duration of the pod. Set your screen name as your first name, phonetic pronunciation of your name if you think it's necessary, and preferred pronouns if you'd like to share them. So if my name is Cara, I could just put Cara the way that it's spelled, but knowing that that could be mispronounced, I could say Cara and then in parentheses Car-UH, and then in another set of parentheses she, her, if those are my preferred pronouns. Number 2, instructions and boundaries. To get started, each member introduces themselves in no more than 2 minutes, covering all 4 of the below topics, which will be cultural and demographic background, education, profession, and then skills, interests, and hobbies. Each member is encouraged to state their preferred pronouns as part of these introductions, and as each member introduces a topic, they're also encouraged to highlight it as one they would particularly would or would not like to be asked about. So culture and demographic background can be where you're from, where you live or have lived, the cultures or languages that you feel connected to, etc. Education can be what you studied or are studying, what your favorite topic or subject to learn about has been, etc. Profession, what you currently do or have done for a living, your professional aspirations or questions that you're grappling with, etc. And skills, interests, and hobbies are the passions that define you in your personal time, topics or activities that you feel uniquely knowledgeable about, and more. Number 3, open question and answer. Basically, at this point, once introductions are done, the floor is open to questions from any member to another specifically, or as a question posed to the whole pod. Some possible questions are as follows. I'll read one, but we have 3 for each of the categories if you are listening to this as a podcast. For cultural and demographic background, you can ask, what was it like to grow up where you grow up, live the childhood that you lived, and have the familial experience that you had? For education, you could ask, can you explain to us specifically what it is that you learned or researched? For profession, can you explain to us specifically what it is that you do for work on an everyday basis? And for skills, interests, and hobbies, what is it that energizes you so much about this interest of yours? Do you think you could see yourself one day turning it into a means to make a living? And those questions that I read are just the top examples for each, asking for more kind of top level explanations. But the other questions that we have posed as potential questions in our document are much more open-ended and complex and profound, and I think will lead to unique conversation in addition to just asking for, explanations and clarifications. Number 4, time considerations. We expect pods to last about 1 hour, but use your judgment. I mean, let it go longer if you want it to. Be considerate of others' time. Let others obviously contribute and don't spend too much time talking yourself, but be considerate when shortening or extending your participation. Number 5, as far as post-pod expectations, there are a few things to keep in mind when wrapping up. We won't match you with the same person on a pod more than once. So if you enjoyed talking to someone, tell them and ask to stay in touch. We'll send out an extremely brief survey after the pod as well about your experience and thoughts on your peers. So keep an eye out for that. That's it for instructions. I will next talk about the sort of guidelines for how to communicate. Guidelines. Number 1, the primary goal is to learn from each other. The main objective is to learn. Everyone is an expert in their own experiences. Treat this as an opportunity to ask others about their areas of expertise, especially on topics you may not have previously explored. Number 2, civility and respect are essential. An uncommon pod hinges on participants maintaining civility and respect at all times. Curiosity is encouraged. You can ask questions and listen actively, but always with full recognition of participants' humanity. No one's experiences or perspectives are more valid or more human than another's. Number 3, speak from personal experience. Use I statements and avoid making generalizations, assumptions, or passing personal judgment. Share your own experiences and stories, not your opinions, conclusions, or assumptions when it's inappropriate to. Communicate how your experiences have impacted your beliefs and feelings using statements like, this experience made me feel, or because of that, I believe. Number 4, answer with politics, religion, or sexuality. Do not ask about it. Do not ask about those 3 topics, and instead only bring them up if they are integral to your response to someone else's question. Number 5, this is the people disagreement framework. If you feel tension because of or disagree with another member's sentiment, we have the following steps to follow. The first is to say something like, thank you for sharing your perspective. I may have a different view, or follow-up questions that could be perceived as disagreement. Would you be open to me sharing these? The second one is to present any ensuing questions or perspectives entirely with those I statements from before about your experiences and stories, not your conclusions or assumptions. The next is, at any point, respect the desire of any member of the pod to move the conversation elsewhere. Respect boundaries in that sense. And the last one is to be cognizant of time spent on these topics that could lead to tension or disagreement, allow other topics to be discussed, and all members' voices to be heard. Some final guidelines here to set the scene for a future pod. Have fun, be yourself. Come curious, be open and willing to challenge your own perspectives. Listen actively and avoid interrupting. Acknowledge first, so highlight what you found interesting in someone's response before adding your perspective or asking a new question. And finally, understand the impact of your words. Remember, intent may not always match impact. Perception shapes our truth, even if it didn't match the intended impact of a certain communication. So, communicate thoughtfully. That wraps up the People Uncommon Pod guidelines as they stand today, as of our recording of our very first Uncommon Pods episode. They are absolutely subject to change, but I did want to share them in advance of our first recording and also us sorting people that have signed up into their own pods as well. So sign up for a pod in the show notes. We hope that you enjoy our first and future conversations that we will be releasing moving forward. And thank you so much for being part of the People community.